graduated from medical school, I took an oath. I stood up, I raised my right hand, and I swore to prevent disease whenever I could. In my innocence, I believed that the battles that lay ahead would be against cancer, heart disease, emotional disorders, but I am no longer so naive. After 3 decades and thousands of hours with young people in distress, I've discovered my most challenging fight is not against dangerous diseases. It's against dangerous ideas. I'm here today to discuss a few of these dangerous ideas and to emphatically urge you to prevent them from reaching your young people. Ideas such as the restrictions of traditional morality are an obstacle to healthy sexuality. There is no ideal context for sexual activity. Adolescent sexual behavior is part of normal development. And finally, that the differences between male and female are due to socialization and not biology. These ideas are at the foundation of the sexuality education programs that are published and distributed by UN agencies such as UNESCO. Not only do they go against the moral fabric of most societies, they simply are not true. They are not medically accurate. Mind you, you're not going to necessarily notice these radical ideas in the programs because they are written with a positive language, a language that leads you to believe, yes, I want these kind of programs for the young people in my country, but please take a closer look, like what we're going to do today. Look at the material that's written for young people, not only the material that's written for policymakers and other adults. You have to look at the actual material, the websites, the pamphlets that are created for young people. And you'll see that these programs are not what you think they are. As a doctor caring for young people for 25 years, I've seen a steady stream of patients, mostly girls and women, come through my office. They were suffering from the sexual decisions they made. Their suffering was 100% avoidable. I saw so many casualties that I wrote this book, Unprotected, in which I told the stories of some of my patients and how dangerous ideas, such as the ones I mentioned, combined with an ignorance of established scientific facts about reproductive health, contributed to their situations. It's very frustrating as a doctor to see one person after the next, young people with their entire lives ahead of them, working hard to pursue their dreams, having to deal with pain and suffering that could have been avoided. It's because of these students that I met, whose stories that I told in this book, that I'm here today. Now, after Unprotected, I began to study what's taught in sexuality education, especially the websites that are recommended to adolescents. And I wrote a second book called You're Teaching My Child What? As a physician, I have one objective: to keep people out of the offices of doctors and therapists. I discovered in my research that groups like International Planned Parenthood Federation and SIECUS, Sexuality, Information and Education Council of the United States, these groups who are at the helm of sexuality education and have esteemed status at the United Nations, they stand in my way as a doctor. because their priority is not sexual health. It is sexual license and sexual rights. An example of this is a pamphlet called Healthy, Happy, and Hot, a young person's guide to their rights, sexuality, and living with HIV. This publication is distributed by International Planned Parenthood Federation and their affiliates at some official UN conferences. The advice that it provides is deadly. You'd never know from reading this pamphlet that to be HIV positive is a serious medical condition. You wouldn't know that sexual activity places others at grave risk, and that an infected person has not only rights, but obligations. Instead, this pamphlet tells young people with HIV, sex can feel really great and be fun. I'm quoting now. There are lots of different ways to have sex and lots of different types of sex. Just have fun, explore, and be yourself. There is no suggestion to refrain from sexual behavior or even to delay it. There is no ideal context for intimacy. All encounters are equally acceptable. This guide, it says, is for young people living with HIV who are married, in a relationship with one or more partners, as well as those who are single, dating, or just want to have sex. Multiple partners is okay. Sex while high on alcohol and drugs also gets a green light. This is your choice, it says. How about sex without condoms? You'd expect that the line would be drawn there, wouldn't you? Instead, this pamphlet says, sometimes people choose not to have safer sex. If this is something that you and your partner agree to, then it is your choice. International Planned Parenthood Federation claims to be an advocate for reproductive health, but the rights-based advice in this pamphlet will make people sick. Early sexual debut, multiple partners, sex while under the influence, foregoing condoms, these are well-established risk factors for sexually transmitted infections and HIV, as well as unwanted pregnancy, obviously. Young people who take this advice to heart will have more doctor's appointments, not less. And this is particularly true for girls and for men who have sex with other men. The most troubling part of this pamphlet from a public health perspective is what infected young people are told about disclosing their HIV status. There are many reasons that people do not share their status, and they have a long reasons that includes that the possibility that is the relationship will end. In other words, if you disclose to a potential sexual partner that you're HIV positive, you might be rejected. And that's a reason to not tell them. Sharing your HIV status is called disclosure. Your decision about whether to disclose may change with different people and situations. You have the right to decide if, when, and how to disclose your HIV status. Some countries have laws that say people living with HIV must tell their sexual partner about their status before having sex. These laws violate the rights of people living with HIV by forcing them to disclose or face the possibility of criminal charges. Let's examine this closely. Consider the following. Let's say you have Chris, who is HIV positive. He meets Brian, who's HIV negative, and they have some sexual encounters. Chris does not feel comfortable telling Brian his HIV status, so he doesn't. Brian gets HIV. He's unaware that he put himself at risk, so it doesn't occur to him to go for testing promptly. His HIV goes undiagnosed and untreated. Chris and Brian have multiple other partners in other cities and other countries. Chris continues to keep his infection a secret because he doesn't feel ready to discuss it. And he's learned from this pamphlet that that is okay. Brian can't disclose his HIV status because he doesn't know that he's carrying the deadly virus. The thing is that right after he becomes positive, Brian's viral load is higher than they will ever be at any other time in his life, because the viral load of HIV soars right in the beginning of the infection. What that means is the sexual partners that he has during this time are at higher risk than ever. Here are some questions that I have for International Planned Parenthood Federation. Why does having HIV confer more rights on the individual, but not more obligations? Why does Chris's right to privacy trump Brian's and Brian's partners' the right to make informed choices and to get diagnosed and treated? Delaying treatment can hasten the development of AIDS, which is fatal. The earlier that Brian is identified and treated, the better his chances of staying healthy. Why is Chris's right to feel comfortable disclosing his status, why does that right trump Brian's right to stay alive? While these questions are debated, a pandemic rages. As a physician who has witnessed firsthand the suffering that accompanies HIV/AIDS, indeed all sexually transmitted infections, I read this and I am furious. And you should be too. Because there's no doubt the guidance that it provides adolescents fuels the worldwide pandemics. It causes unnecessary disease and unnecessary death. So I say to the UN affiliates that produce and distribute this material, shame on you. Now, International Planned Parenthood Federation and SIECUS are large and powerful groups. Their philosophy states that sexuality extends from cradle to grave. They endorse early sexual activity, multiple partners, and sexual experimentation. These, of course, are the very behaviors that fuel the epidemics of STIs and HIV. They fuel abortion and emotional distress. And that is so for a very simple reason. When sexual license is the priority, when people are given a green light to begin sex at an early age and to explore and experiment, their sexual health suffers. You don't need a degree in public health to understand this. You just need common sense, right? When I say that sexual health suffers, when I say that sexual freedom is the priority, here's what I mean. We have a big problem here in the United States with sexually transmitted diseases. 1 in 4 girls between the ages of 14 and 19 has a sexually transmitted infection, and almost 20% of them got the infection within 1 year of becoming sexually active. 50% of heterosexual men are infected with the human papillomavirus, and most of them don't know it. This is a graph showing the rate of chlamydia. This is just from 2000 to 2009. You can see that it's going up. The lower graph is women's screened. The higher graph is the rate of infection. Chlamydia, as you probably know, is one of the main reasons for infertility all over the world. This is from the United Kingdom. In a screening there, nearly 1 in 10 of young people from the age of 16 to 24 were positive. Almost 10% of young people in the United Kingdom. And here you can see for yourselves, these are the physician visits for genital herpes from 1966, which is down in that left-hand corner, to 1999, which is up here. And if we had the previous decade, you would see that it has continued to go up. Finally, here is syphilis, 1941 is at this end. Then in the 40s, there was an abrupt decline because of antibiotics. But since that time, we have had significant syphilis. And in the past 10 years, it's going up again, right here. How did we get to this medical and social catastrophe? How did we reach a point where sexual rights and sexual freedom are more important than sexual health? I'm going to give you a little history lesson. It's important because if you want to fight this kind of message, you have to understand where it's coming from. You have to understand its origins and its founding fathers and mothers, so to speak. Not too long ago, there were essentially two sexually transmitted infections, gonorrhea and syphilis. They were awful diseases. There was no cure for them. In the 40s, during World War II, antibiotics, miracle drugs. With one shot, gonorrhea and syphilis was cured. It didn't take long for medical experts to believe that sexually transmitted infections were a thing of the past. This is the 1960 winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine. He said, "We are seeing the virtual elimination of infectious diseases as a significant factor in social life." And of course, this includes sexually transmitted infections. So this was in 1962. Can you imagine that? That a winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine is saying, we are closing the book on infectious diseases. In the 50s, we had Alfred Kinsey, Dr. Kinsey. His model of sexuality was that traditional morality is destructive. He believed that sexuality is not an appetite to be curbed, and that the human animal, a phrase that he preferred, is pansexual. Now, Kinsey's research, we now know, was fraudulent. He was a deeply, deeply disturbed human being, and I'm saying that as a psychiatrist. It's unlikely, and I know this after reading his biography, it's unlikely that this man experienced even one day of what you and I would consider healthy sexuality in his entire 62 years of his miserable life. Nonetheless, sexuality education is based on his views. So that was Kinsey. Next, 1960, birth control pills became available. It was felt that unwanted pregnancy was a thing of the past. So get an idea here of the milieu of what was going on socially. No sexually transmitted infections, the medical establishment believed, because of penicillin and antibiotics, and no unwanted pregnancies. Then we had the sexual revolution, okay? The idea that traditional values should be rejected, free love, casual sex, sex without consequences, make love, not war. If you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. These were the ideas that had great, tremendous impact on young people in this country and in the rest of the Western world. Next, we had feminism, women's liberation. It's not that I'm saying it didn't do some good things, it did, but it also brought the idea that marriage is an oppressive institution created by men to dominate women. So in the midst of all this chaos in society, sexuality education was born. It was born in the early 60s by this woman, Mary Calderon, who was a physician at Planned Parenthood, and she founded SIECUS, the Sexuality Information Education Council of the US. It sounds like a government institution, but it was a private, and it still is a private institution. Now, like Kinsey, she believed that there was an urgent need to break from traditional views about sexuality. Sex education had too much negativity, she insisted. The real problem, said Dr. Calderon, was that society was puritanical and repressed. There were too many no's in sex education. Her approach, the approach of Sekas, would be based on yeses. Proper sex education would teach children that from the day they're born, they are sexual beings, and that the expression of their sexuality is positive, natural, and healthy. In a book that she wrote for parents, she wrote, "Children are sexual and think sexual thoughts and do sexual things. Parents must accept and honor their child's erotic potential." Professionals who study children have recently affirmed the strong sexuality of the newborn. In addition to teaching cradle-to-grave sexuality, the goal of sex education was to have young people choose for themselves. And this is so critical. Look, in every other area of medicine, let's say I'm talking to someone about their diet because they weigh too much, or their lifestyle, they're too sedentary, they're not getting exercises, or their cholesterol is too high. As their doctor, I'm obligated to say to them, look, this is not healthy. I really strongly suggest you make the following changes in your life. If someone is very overweight, or someone smokes cigarettes, or whatever it is, their health style is not good for them, I'm obligated, whether they're going to heed what I say or not, whether they're going to